I'm Mike DeLuca. Welcome to this rare In the Trenches look at the craft of screenwriting. Today I'm joined by Jonathan Hensleigh, whose credits include Die Hard with a Vengeance, Jumanji, Armageddon, and The Punisher, which he also directed. Welcome, Jonathan. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Mike.
So let's start at the beginning. How did you get into screenwriting?
Well, I was an attorney in Manhattan for 7 years, and I was a corporate M&A associate in
What's M&A?
mergers and acquisitions.
Okay.
I was in a number of fairly large law firms, and I realized by about age 30 that I felt that I missed my calling, really, that I wasn't pursuing really what I set out to do when I was about 14 or 15 years old, and that was to write either for the stage or for film. And so I had the very good fortune of making some money that allowed me to leave the law firm and then develop a number of screenplays, which I then sold.
Did you kind of know in the back of your mind all through those years, those like formative years, that you were kind of like you were going to movies a lot and watching television and just feeling the call of that, even though you were going through your attorney phase?
Yeah, it's funny. I had always written dialogue, and often to the amusement of some of the partners that I worked for, and also the consternation of some of them. They were always wondering what I was doing.
Right.
And I had to sort of hide it in my notes of a particular meeting, or even when I was sitting wasting time in court or waiting to make a pleading or what have you.
So that's really interesting. So your kind of career in fiction was peaking out, even during that first career.
I'd often ride the express train, the red line in Manhattan, and I'd sit and listen to people's conversation. And I used to record it to try to improve my ear, for instance. This is when I was an attorney. And then I actually had written a full-length, full-evening 3-act stage play that I didn't show to anyone, but it was always my aspiration.
Oh, cool. And did you feel like it was going to be a viable career option, or just it was your only option at that point when you made the choice?
I felt it was my only option. I really felt driven. I felt like I couldn't risk failure at that point. I just, one reaches a point where it's scary, actually, because you're without a net, and you feel that if you don't succeed at this, you're going to have to go back to a career that you don't feel suited for, or switch altogether. Or
how many feature scripts did you write before you kind of struck pay dirt?
I have my close friend Frank Darabont, who he bitches and moans about the ease and quickness with which I broke in, and I am fortunate. I mean, Frank was a set dresser and had worked in all kinds of below-the-line capacities on feature films for years before, and he was writing the entire time.
Yeah, Frank was actually a co-writer on Nightmare on Elm Street 3 when I was at New Line.
Exactly right, and he and Chuck Russell did a couple of horror pictures, etc. But it took him a long, long time to break in, and when he hears my story, he always winces, because I was an attorney. I stopped practicing law. I wrote one script.
Which was?
It's a script called Neighborhoods, and David Launer read at ICM, who was a young literary agent at ICM at the time, read that. ICM signed me, and then my second script, Mad Dogs and Englishmen, was optioned by Bobby Newmeyer, bless his soul, who just passed away. So it was really just a matter of months. Bobby's wife, Debbie Newmeyer, gave Mad Dogs and Englishmen to her employer, Steven Spielberg, and who gave it to George Lucas. And George hired me for the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and then Steven hired me to do a rewrite on A Far Off Place, which was my first feature film credit. So just within really a matter of months.
You were up there with the big boys.
Well, not with the big boys,
Right.
but my career was established, and I got a 2-picture deal at Disney. I sold a couple of pitches, and then A Far Off Place, the Amblin picture, went into production, and it was just one after another after that point.
These early screenplays, did you have friends and family kind of read them and give you feedback, or did you just kind of go it alone and throw them out there?
No, I had some people in Manhattan that read them.
Was that valuable to you at all, getting those kind of early opinions?
Yeah, it's always valuable if you ask the right questions.
Yeah. Well, I guess the right people too.
Yeah, these people who I asked to read were not involved in the industry, and the questions that I asked were simple. They were, did you like it?
Right.
Were you moved by it?
Right. You sound like a test screening questionnaire.
Well, truly.
Right.
I mean, did you find anything about it offensive? Was there anything confusing? Did you have to put the screenplay down because you found it unconvincing, or the plot bogged down, or
And you got good feedback,
absolutely.
or useful feedback?
Absolutely. In fact, I would go so far as to say that the non-industry people that I've had read my scripts give better feedback
right.
in simple terms than industry folks.
Yeah, it's weird. The notes that come out of studios, those memos look like they were printed, en masse, that just all begin with, "We feel the draft has come a long way, and we think that you've taken it a further step, and we feel the dialogue," and it's all like, it feels like very cookie cutter.
Well, you didn't do the first sentence justice, because normally it's more like this. While we collectively believe that you may be the finest writer in the English language other than Ernest Hemingway, and we think that you've really advanced the project, we have the following 378 objections to what you've written.
Right, you get that little sliver of compliment up front. How do you know when kind of a story is percolating in your head that you're ready to flesh it out to screenplay length? Do you outline, or does it germinate in your mind for a while?
I outline intensely, yeah. And my outlines then are easily transferable into a script. I generally find that I take a 5-page block outline where I know the beginning of the story. I do work with the nomenclature of a lot of the industry. In other words, I do work with sort of inciting events in the first 15 minutes that get the drama rolling. I do work with a page 30 moment, which would cap a first act, where the antagonist and the protagonist are pitted against each other. I do work with the signposts of the second act, really, that's sort of known by the industry, where the plot takes different twists and turns, and you mislead the audience and redirect the audience, and try to keep the audience a little bit behind you rather than ahead of you, keep them guessing. And then I try to get everything to a boil in the third act. So I do work with a formula to some extent.
Right.
I think that any sort of formulaic writing that's taught in these idiotic screenwriting courses is too rigid. But I think there are some portions of the formula that should be honored.
Now, how did you pick up the kind of just the general rules of that formula?
I just watched movies.
Just from watching movies?
Yeah, I mean, if you watch anything, if you watch The Wizard of Oz, if you watch Casablanca, if you watch any of the excellently rendered entertainments that Hollywood has produced, you can see clearly certain patterns. And these are people from the independent film world feel that these are too constraining, these structures. However, it has been proved again and again and again that stories that are based on this do compel certain emotions. They are manipulative, certainly, but people enjoy them.
Yeah. And well, even though it's in my intro, it is a craft. Screenwriting is a craft, and storytelling is storytelling. And even before movies, there's even if you don't call it a formula, there's just a way to do things that make whomever you're trying to tell the story to feel satisfied. Yeah,
I mean, if you look at the credits, and the people that I've worked with, I would probably be considered anathema in the indie world, the sort of the Sundance film.
Which is kind of ironic anyway, because the indie world is owned by the corporate world. I mean, the Independent Spirit Awards always amuse me because every single nominated film is backed by a major studio.
I would use the word amusing in its pejorative, and I do find it amusing as well. And I will put it this way, that the British film industry has suffered for years because of a feeling, I think, in certain circles in the BBC and in intellectual circles in England, that there's almost an intrinsic value in a flop. In other words, that which does not commercially succeed must have some hidden inherent merit, artistic merit, that we need to sort of discover. And Hollywood has always laughed uproariously at that.
Oh, that's interesting.
That notion. I believe that. I've seen that.
Right.
I mean, I frankly think that some things that are considered independent films are eminently boring.
Yeah.
So I am traditional in that way.
Right. Do you ever get stuck on for inspiration for a script or a story? Do you ever kind of need to unblock yourself? And what do you do to do that?
Oh, it has so much to do with what one is going through in one's life, you know. I mean, I think it's almost like, I'd use some idiotic new age phrase like biorhythms or something like that. And sometimes it comes quickly and sometimes it comes slowly, and I do all kinds of things. I go skiing, you know. I go to the boozer, you know. I hang out with friends down at the corner bar.
Right.
Fuck off in some way. I try to relax my brain. Or sometimes just sheer rigor, you know. Sometimes bringing in my assistant and staying up all night and just batting the thing against the wall, the idea, and that will spring forth a number of ideas and off you go.
I imagine, because of your very detailed outline phase, once you actually get to writing the script, it happens pretty quickly.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, truly, I do recommend it to anybody. Some writers are just not capable of executing that way. They just don't like it. They like to sit down, type fade in, and find their way into the story.
Right.
And then after they've been in 20 pages in, they kind of know the characters, and then they can start figuring out the plot, etc. I work the other way, and maybe it's my legal training or something. What have you? But truly. It's 6 1/2 of the other. There's no tried true way.
Were you a trial attorney?
No, I was a transactional attorney, but I did appear in court.
Is that like telling a story, you know, when you're in court?
I think for trial appearances, yes. I think that because the very nature of pleading a trial or conducting a trial before a jury is you are telling the story of your client, either the state or the defendant. Or if it's a civil matter, it's the same deal. But no, my stuff was more appellate action in civil courts and stuff like that.
A little drier.
It was abstract rules of law, etc. No, there's no storytelling. No.
Do you read other people's scripts, or do you ever kind of stay on top of what's being bandied about town, or just classic scripts that give you inspiration?
Yeah, I read, and I'm not gonna single any out because then I'll leave some out, etc.
Yeah, but you have colleagues that you share your work with, and that you read their work.
Absolutely, and I like to read what's recently sold, because I like to find out what studio executives are honoring with a big paycheck, you know, and I just want to, I like to keep up with what is vogue.
Well, that's interesting. Now, do you find, for the most, you don't have to be specific, but when you do get those scripts, do you find yourself agreeing with the decision of the executive and the amount paid, or is it more like you can't believe that someone paid what they paid for what you just read?
I think we all do that. I mean, I think it would be ridiculous to deny, and if anybody would deny, they're.
I do it. I know I do it. So.
Absolutely, and it goes the other way. There are times, I just read a script, for instance, by two extremely prominent writers, extremely prominent, about as prominent as it ever gets in town, who co-wrote a script, and it didn't sell, and I was shocked by that because I like their work independently, and I liked the script that they wrote together, and I didn't understand why it didn't sell. And at times, things like that, events like that, a non-sale, make me fear for the industry.
Oh, that's interesting.
Because then I see what they are developing, these executives, these same executives in this case, and it makes me fear for the industry, because what they're developing is utterly inferior to what they just rejected from two extremely prominent writers. So
that's interesting. So you see it work both ways.
Yes.
Was there one script in particular that classic or current that you found helpful in a particular way in terms of your own work, or anything, one inspirational screenplay that really moves you?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I love Thelma and Louise. I remember when I read that, I just thought there was a lot of...
That was a breath of fresh air when that script came out.
Yeah, I loved that script, and I could mention a whole number of them. I like reading older scripts, particularly. I like reading scripts of the pictures that I watched when I was a kid that made me want to go into the industry, Oh,
that's interesting.
So, because some of the writing was very, very fine, I mean, and it's the kind of writing that I fear is not even allowed anymore in Hollywood.
Right.
And if you see some of the stuff that was written in the 50s and 60s particularly, and I'm not talking about things like Easy Rider
Right.
or things that were considered very risk-taking at the
Right.
time. I'm talking about things like The Great Escape,
Right.
or I don't know, The Dirty Dozen even, you
Right.
know. I just, whatever, I think that there is not necessarily a diminution in the talent level in town. It's a diminution of the ability to appreciate talent in the town, but I'll leave it at that.
That's funny. I sometimes I get worried that, I got into the business in '86 and I saw at least some screenwriters that were still working off literary inspiration, but now you run into a lot of writers that are working off television inspiration. Like every successive generation seems to be moving further away from the batch of writers that you mentioned from the '50s and '60s.
Well, look, any attempt to decry, that, or to make some sort of statement
Right.
about that, we're both going to look like a bunch of funny.
You always sound like that old guy complaining about Elvis music.
Well, and we're both not old, and well, truly.
Nah, well, you're not old.
I am still very much in touch.
Right.
You talk about the pulse readers. I think both of us are, and I'm currently involved in a bunch of stuff that's going to make a bunch of money for the studios. And do I find those touchstones that you just mentioned, television rather than, I don't want to call it literature because it sounds so highfalutin or whatever, but just stuff that's more elevated than fucking Gilligan's Island. Put it that way, okay?
Right.
Do I find that revolting? Yes. And something has to be done about it. There has to be some sort of collective movement against that.
Right. Would you ever recommend any type of screenwriting classes or schooling for new writers, or do you think it's kind of it's got to be like an ingrown thing? I guess it's different for everybody, but.
I do not recommend any kind of thing. I mean,
Have you ever had any experience with any?
No. I paused outside one of the classes. I'm not going to name names, but where I was meeting a friend and heard about 10 minutes of one and was so repulsed I had to go chain smoke in the outside in the street in Manhattan. But
if you don't mind my asking, what did you overhear that made you run into the night?
It was an approach taken, and this is by probably the most prominent course offered, that I should note every studio executive in the last 15 years probably has taken.
Well, that explains a lot.
Right. But I viewed it as an overly formulaic and an overly constrained approach, and that there are certain rules laid down in those courses that I think destroy the creative impulse rather than let it run. And there are criticisms made of the perpetrators of these courses.
Right.
That they can only teach. It's the old adage, those
Sure.
who can't do teach. And their proponents would say, oh, well, that's horseshit. Certainly the teacher can have very, very valid things to say, even if they haven't done it themselves. And I would only say to that you should, the teachers of these courses, you should find their screenplays.
Right.
Because they're of public record, and you should read them.
I would imagine. I always wondered about that.
Well, you should. They are of public record.
Right.
You can find them, and you should read one of them, Michael, and you'll probably vomit.
Okay, so that takes care of the schooling topic. How was your experience on Young Indiana Jones and working with George Lucas?
It was great. It was in a period of my life when I was establishing my career. I didn't know how to work as a writer professionally.
So this was your first kind of professional experience?
The first check that I received in compensation for written work was from Lucasfilm and Amblin Entertainment to write for ABC, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and
Now with Lucas and Spielberg, I imagine the network. Did you have to deal with network notes as well, or everything was funneled through Lucas?
It was a little bit. I mean, but it was Bob Iger was the ABC guy then, but it was almost all George. And I mean, George at that point was not doing any feature films, so he really was the guy. I mean, he was really the showrunner.
Okay.
So
you had a lot of interaction with him, and he was basically running the show.
Well, yeah, when we blocked out the episodes, it was myself and a few other writers sitting in his office at the Skywalker Ranch for about 15 hours a day for a month, and then we'd go home, and then we'd reconvene in Northern California, and then, you know, back and forth. And there was a session in England, and there was on-set work, and it was great because, you know, these things were directed by feature film directors.
It was a wonderful series. I thought it was a fantastic series.
Thank you. I mean, it's due to George, you know.
What was he like to work with? Was that a good experience?
Yeah, it was a wonderful. Yeah, it was a wonderful experience. It was. He's a nice man, and you know, obviously he's an icon, and you know, I learned a great deal from him and everything. It was a wonderful experience.
Any specific lessons or insights that you took from that being your first professional experience?
I think
or were you spoiled because it was good?
It was good, and I was spoiled, you know. I was such a babe in the woods. I was such a fledgling, really. I was, at that point, I really was so insecure. And I think George gave me confidence, you know. He just said, go with it. And he loves writers, and he just gave me a lot of what the English call bottle, you know, spine, you know, to just go for it, and to feel unfettered, and, you know, it was a wonderful experience.
Do you find it hard to look at your own work, or do you just kind of like do it and move on? And
some of it, yeah. The stuff I don't like, either stuff that I don't like what I wrote, you know, in hindsight. It's either I hate what I wrote, or B, I like what I wrote, but I didn't like the way the actor delivered it, or I didn't like the way it was directed. And so it falls into one of those categories. But for the most part, I think my stuff has come out okay, you know.
And did the writing experience for other people get you into the mindset to say, I want to be a director now and have more control over the process and just get my vision on screen?
I think I think more than anything else, my desire to go into directing was out of boredom. And,
really?
Yeah. That I'd just done it for so long. I'd been writing for pictures for so long that I wanted to do something else. And that maybe have been 75% of it. The other 25% of it was yes, a desire to have more control over things in the production. You know, more control over more say, if you will, over the casting, over the general aesthetic of the picture, everything from art direction to costuming to et cetera. And I found that not only did I not, when I did The Punisher, I didn't have more control. So I found that it's sort of a myth, that there are still sort of corporate forces, if you will, that can override the director.
Right.
I may want to do a really, really small film, just so for once I can say, okay, like it or hate it, everything on the screen is mine.
Are you good about maintaining discipline while you're writing? Do you keep certain work rules, or you kind of play it by ear?
Yeah, it's the attorney in me.
So just like once you set out, it's going to get done.
Yeah, unless I'm just a void of ideas, unless I'm tired or just don't have it. Often, you know, you'll sit there and you'll say, I have this character in mind. You know, I have this wonderful character, but you don't yet have the plot yet figured out to get that character to be all he can be or she can be, and you found her, and all discipline goes to hell at that point. You know, there's just nothing that can be done. You wake up in the morning, total discipline. You didn't go to the party the night before, you know. Your friends in from out of town that you went to law school or whatever, no. So you woke up and you're sitting there, hands on the keyboard, ready to roll, and nothing happens. And that can go on for days. And when that happens, I just say, fuck it. And I break it down. I go on to something else. So discipline is a wonderful attribute. It doesn't always get you
all the way
to, the end.
I want to discuss a scene with you that you cited as a particularly strong example of your work, and it's now kind of this legendary scene from Die Hard with a Vengeance, the scene where Bruce Willis playing John McClane is deposited in Harlem with a sandwich board on his body that says, "I hate niggers." Where did the idea for that kind of provocative scene come from?
Well, boy, this is a tough one. I was originally, this is long-winded. It may or may not be of interest.
Right. Oh, it's going to be of interest because I remember sitting in the theater seeing that and just going, holy shit. And it was kind of like a jolting moment. And then it just like gave such a great entree into Samuel Jackson's character.
Well, I'll tell you. I met with Brandon Lee, and Brandon Lee had read a script of mine and wanted me to write something for him. His career was just bursting out.
I remember that. Yeah.
It was all the talk in Hollywood was Brandon Lee this and Brandon Lee that. He was going to be the next big action superstar. I was very flattered. I definitely wanted to do it, and I embarked on writing something for him. My first thought was to pair Brandon as a guy in Harlem, as this Eurasian guy in Harlem, who gets thrown together with a white cop, and they have racial issues, et cetera, et cetera. And I was probably 30 or 40 pages into it, and I got a call from Ed Pressman to come over to the Carlisle Hotel in Manhattan for breakfast. And Ed was very, very distraught. When I got at the hotel at 8 o'clock in the morning, he told me that Brandon Lee had been shot on the set. And as Ed Pressman and I sat there over breakfast, Ed got another call saying that he had passed away. I then went back to my apartment after that, and the genesis of everything that I was writing, again, this was not an emotional event in my life. I didn't know Brandon, really. I had had 2 meetings with him. He was a hell of a nice guy, and it was a terrible loss, Hollywood, but I had to move on to my own business, and that was this picture that I was writing, for this actor, obviously was no longer viable. So that afternoon, I think, I changed it to a black guy. I'm not kidding. I mean, that's how it started. And I thought that there was probably a greater castability, if you will, that there were more people in Hollywood that could probably play it as a black guy. And a lot of the racial angle that I was writing between the Asian guy and a white guy could kind of translate a little bit. And that's how it happened. And so I then started out anew and created it that way.
Was Die Hard with a Vengeance a combination of scripts?
What I had started to write for Brandon Lee and then changed.
I see, it became the script for Die Hard.
No. This was called Simon Says. Simon Says was a spec script which sold everything. Die Hard was not involved in any of this. In any of this. This was 2 years later.
Gotcha.
And again, it was just a script for Brandon Lee that then became a new script.
So that's interesting. So an original piece of material changed once and then changed again. Like it became a movie for an African-American actor after Brandon Lee's death, and then it kind of got adapted into
the plot really
John McClane.
The plot really thickens at this point. I had the script done. The script went out on the spec market in 1993. There were 3 studios involved. There was an auction. And it was a great moment in my life because it was my first huge spec sale. It sold for $1 million to Fox. I had a very intense conversation with the head of production of Fox, head of creative at Fox, saying, my agent and my attorney were on the phone. We said, there are other bidders. I said, I don't want to sell it to you unless you give me your word that you're going to keep the script fairly intact. Now, that whole sequence that you mentioned that happens in Harlem, that was one of the sequences that was near and dear to me.
Oh, interesting. So that was something you put right up front, even when the deal was being made, that must be there.
Absolutely. The first 60 pages of Simon Says, my spec script, is Die Hard with a Vengeance. The first 60 pages of Die Hard with a Vengeance. I didn't alter it at all. And I said, I really want this preserved. And the guy said, yes, absolutely. That's one of the sequences that we love. And I said, wonderful, and we concluded the sale. I then flew out to Hollywood to meet with them, and the first thing that the guy said was, this sequence in Harlem we don't really like, and we'd like you to reconceive it.
The same guy that you were on the phone
Yes.
with?
Now, this has happened to me
Countless.
10 times. No, I can count the times, Michael. It's probably about 10 times. But this was one of the most egregious. The meeting didn't end very well, as you can imagine, and I was released from the project, and they brought in another writer to rewrite the script, to rewrite Simon Says. And the project then foundered, and it just lay there. I then met John McTiernan, and we were going to make my script, Captain Blood, at Warner Brothers. That fell through because of financing, so I gave McTiernan Simon Says. We were out of Wyoming at McTiernan's house. McTiernan said, I love this. Bruce Willis and I have been looking for the third installment of Die Hard. McTiernan sent Simon Says to Bruce Willis, who said, this is it. This is what we've been waiting for. And we all then went back to the same executive at Fox. The same executive at Fox who bought Simon Says, promising me that he would leave all that material intact, who then said that all of that material had to go after he bought it. The first thing he said in that meeting, when it was then presented to him as Die Hard with a Vengeance, was, wonderful, I've always loved the beginning of the script, particularly the Harlem sequence.